By way of introduction, my name is Josh Brodbent. I am the RVP for Solutions Engineering at Beyond Trust Software, specifically our public sector group. I have been doing IT in some form or fashion for 25 years now. I started in MSP when I was 12. I did national competitions and national certifications when I was like 14, which was a record of some kind at the time, I guess. And I transitioned that career into doing architecture and design for networks in public sector, K through 12, and Department of Defense. So that's a little bit about me on a technical level. I don't have the picture slides. On a personal level, I am married. I have 4 kids, or as I like to tell anybody when I travel, I have 1 kid and 3 spares. So if you are here and you would like to take an extra child, I am more than happy to give them away. No, I'm just kidding. No, seriously, I love my kids. They are, I have 4 of them. The oldest is 12, the youngest is 4, and the youngest is the only girl in the group. So she has definitely figured out that she's the boss of the house. So that works out really well. In our spare time, we wakeboard. My middle 2 kids play, or we wakeboard. The youngest one doesn't play sports yet. The middle 2 kids do soccer and baseball, and my oldest son is a spelling bee athlete. I don't know whatever you would call that, but he competes. He's competed since he was in 3rd grade. He's in 8th grade now. Spelling bees, never lost a regional, placed 3rd last year in state, and this is his last year to try to make it to nationals, so hopefully he'll do his thing. He didn't get spelling from me. I'm glad they invented word check. So, all right, tell you guys a little bit about Beyond Trust. A couple of things real quick. This is a really fascinating conference for us to be at. And one of the reasons it's fascinating is because it brings together so many different sections of cybersecurity and security in general. Seeing lockpicking and safe cracking and all of the other things, hardware cracking downstairs, is really fascinating to me. Because security does encompass so much more than just software. At Beyond Trust, we are a software company. We specifically focus mostly around the privileged identity space. We want to take care of privileged accounts. We do have 1,250 employees in 18 different countries. One of the things that I like to call out about these slides that's important to me is that we have 75 different patents in the PAM space, which is really unique, especially when you realize that they go all the way back to like the mid-90s. So we inherited some IP in one of our acquisitions that's around the way that you manage privilege access in Linux. So it's a policy form for sudo and stuff like that. So before other companies even had a thought about privilege access management and what that looked like, we had patents in the area. So that's one of the things that I always find interesting about that. So I like this slide to set the stage for just a second about where we are from a current events perspective. And the funny thing about doing these kinds of slides to me is you put together this slide, or in my case, my marketing team puts together this slide for me, and I get to deliver it in 2 weeks. And it's usually outdated by the time I could deliver it. Like, we could add 15 more up here by the time that I deliver the conversation. And it's one of those things that exploits or hacks or breaches or ransomware attacks, whatever you want to call them, they happen exponentially more every day. And it's almost to the point where they make the news, but we're desensitized to it in some way. We had breaches over the past 18 months that compromised water facilities and hospitals and gas pipelines. And those things barely made a blip on our radar. Did anybody in here watch Tiger King? Like right at the beginning of COVID? You got one guy? All right. Nobody else was that bored during the first part of lockdown. Like, it was a train wreck that I couldn't look away from. It really was. It was the weirdest show I have ever watched in my life, and will probably stay that way, hopefully, because I don't ever want to watch anything that insane again. But I remember a couple of months after it came out and I had watched it, I saw a meme that was like, this show was so strange that this happened in the show and you never saw it. And it was a picture of one of the main characters driving a Spider, which is like a type of motorcycle with 2 wheels on the front and 1 wheel on the back. And he had a skeleton in the passenger seat. And it's like, this clip happened in the show, and you never noticed that this dude was driving around with a skeleton in his motorcycle the entire time. And they were right. Like, I went back and watched the episode just to be like, that skeleton was never there. Sure enough, in the show, this dude's driving around with a skeleton as his passenger. Okay, it was funnier in my head. But anyways, the reason that I bring it up is because breaches are a lot like that. Like, they are so wild and out of hand today that the dude driving around with the skeleton doesn't even make the news. It's like living in Florida. The strange things happen and they just don't make the news. But what it ultimately results in is that we have to have a different model for how we handle cybersecurity, especially from an enterprise perspective. From an enterprise perspective, we have for 30 plus years, as long as I've been doing this, looked at our enterprise security as a traditional moat and castle type infrastructure, right? So we've looked at it as long as we build a wall around everything that we have and we make sure that that wall is robust enough and there are enough things on the wall, maybe we put a moat around the wall, anything inside the wall is automatically okay. Like, we're all right, we trust our users, which is a terrible plan, but we trust our users. Everything that happens here, we're going to be okay with from a security perspective. It's an acceptable level of risk. Over time, we've realized a few things. Number one, once somebody breaches that wall, we have no idea how long they're in there, which is what happened with the SolarWinds breach. They were in there for 6+ months, and we're still cleaning up. But beyond that, nobody anticipated the massive shift to work from home. So now, every admin assistant's kid's Xbox is on our corporate networks. Their Wii is on our corporate network. So we can't build a wall big enough for all of these devices to fit inside our corporate network. There's no way. Everybody that's here, I'm sure, has seen or been familiar with security conferences like this one and others where they have the wall of shame up and they show you text messages that are going in and out from people's phones. From a corporate perspective, you consume or have that many devices on your corporate VPN, at some point, you can't do anything else. It's there, and you have to give them free rein. But you don't. And that's why we've looked at Zero Trust as a model. That's why it's made a lot of headlines. That's why it's been a conversation. And the funny thing is, 10 years ago, Zero Trust was a term that was mostly made up by another PAM vendor so that they could splash it all over their marketing. And then it slowly garnered like a meaning of some kind, and then eventually somebody picked it up and decided, hey, this should actually have a standard to it. So NIST came out with NIST 800-207, and they put a standard behind it, and they said, in this standard, what we want is a continuous verification of users. Every time a user goes to access a resource or authenticate, we want them to authenticate, we want to know that they have authorization to access the material that they're accessing, and we want to audit all of that, and whatever tool that they're using to do that, we're going to put together, we're going to collect that data together so that we actually have one single source of security data and authentication data for our entire network. And that's what's important when we talk about Zero Trust is the collective use and organization of tools. A lot of tools used to define Zero Trust or to build it in the architecture already exist in corporate networks today. The problem is that they're siloed, right? The problem is that they all exist as individual tools and not as part of a broader security model that is integrated and incorporated together as a security strategy. So the principles of the Zero Trust model go like this. Require secure and authenticated access to all assets. Adopt and enforce the least privilege model, and inspect and log all activities using security analytics. As you're taking a look at implementing a zero trust model across your environment, there are several things that you have to look at. You have to understand what your data looks like. This is probably one of the hardest things about zero trust as it exists. Data governance, identity governance has always been a challenge because we've had so much unstructured data for so long that we don't know how to tag it. And sometimes we don't even know what the data is to know how to tag it. In addition to that, this requires cooperation from the end user and from the business users and use cases. Understanding where sensitive data exists, getting them to stop storing sensitive data in places that it shouldn't go. All of these things are important in implementing a zero trust model so that you can ensure proper security is there, but it requires cooperation from the end user or enterprise to make sure that you have that stuff tagged correctly. And it's one of the most difficult things in the process. And then once we have that done, we talk about access to that data. How are we going to control access to that data? How are we going to understand roles or needs or operations or attribute-based access so that we can make sure that the people who have access to that data are the people that are supposed to have access to it and that their access is revoked when they are no longer supposed to have access to it? We also have to monitor threats as we're doing this. We have to understand the behavior that's happening on our network. Is someone that's accessing this data, are they accessing the data outside of their normal behavior analytics? So they're used to accessing this data, at noon or 12:30 on a Thursday from their desk, and now all of a sudden they're accessing it at 2 a.m. from a seat in Nigeria over VPN. It's probably a problem, and we have to understand that. So we have to understand what those threats look like, and we have to understand what a normal baseline of behavior is so we can understand what abnormal behavior is. And then we have to be able to apply analytics to all of that so that we can ensure that we understand the moments that we have a potential threat. We understand the moments that something is abnormal, and we can investigate what those are. A successful zero trust implementation requires privileged access management for a few reasons. Number one, you have to secure the privileged access and assets you have on your network. Whether that is your network admins that have access to network devices, whether that's Active Directory admins, whether that's your file storage admins, all of those use cases have to be audited and logged in order to make this strategy work. In addition to that, we also need to understand what our end users are doing, and we need to allow our end users to be able to do their jobs and do it well. What we have to do is take the privilege off of the end users and actually add it through policy to the applications that they're launching. So that way, they don't have access if those accounts get compromised and there's lateral movement because the policy is in place. So, as we talk about zero trust and what that looks like, NIST 800-207 outlines a successful implementation for zero trust as an architecture. Again, it's not a product that somebody buys. You can't go buy zero trust off of a shelf. If somebody tries to sell you zero trust off of a shelf, I would highly recommend you walk away. But Beyond Trust can address several of the 207 tenets through various uses of our tool. And we've listed some of those on these slides. We want to make sure that we are here as we implement this to make sure that everything is monitored, everything is measured, that you can audit all of the things that your end users are doing from a privileged access perspective, that you can audit all of the privileged access that they have on their servers and network devices, that we can monitor and audit contractors that are coming in, and remote users that are coming in, to understand that they're accessing the assets that they're supposed to access. We want to make sure that just-in-time privilege and least privilege is enforced across a network. And these things are all important because as we adjust to this kind of passwordless concept, we need to make sure that the assets that we're protecting that no longer require passwords but require some sort of other authentication mechanism, if they are ever compromised, if those authentication mechanisms are ever compromised, you're going to struggle with lateral movement in those because once they have that authentication method and they have that token, say, they're going to be able to move wherever they want to move. So if that account itself doesn't have privilege, but rather the applications have privilege, even if they move laterally, there's nothing for them to have access to other than the standard user permissions that anybody would have. So this is the zero trust diagram that 800.207 put out, where they kind of outlined what a successful strategy from an application standpoint would look like. We put our logos in there because we think the orange is pretty. No, I'm just kidding. No, we put our logos in there in a couple of spots because we believe that these spots are important, and they're important from the modules that we offer. First of all, we do offer the policy administration piece. So from a privileged access perspective, you can use Beyond Trust to manage the policy for your privileged administrators, for your users. All of that policy can be managed in a central console so that you understand what they're doing and what they're supposed to be able to do. And then we have several places inside our products that allow us to have enforcement points, whether that's on the workstations that we're not trusting. We can continue to add privilege management on those, like I talked about with the just-in-time privilege, and also as an enforcement point on your administrators and privileged accounts. This is our 4-pillar slide. These are the pillars of products that we offer that sit across the 800-207 deployment. We look at traditional privileged password management from a perspective of password vaulting, session management, being able to rotate those credentials, making sure that no one has access to those credentials except when they need it, making sure that they get checked back in, rotating service account credentials, all of those things. The second pillar on the left over there is the secure remote access, which has come in as a strong conversation point as we talk about work from home. Being able to have a way that you can do remote access that doesn't require a VPN, that allows a connection secured over an encrypted tunnel, that doesn't give broader sprawl access across your network, but allows somebody specific access to a specific asset. And then the just-in-time endpoint privilege management that we talked about, whether it's Mac, Linux, Windows servers, we have something for those OSs. And then there is our cloud security management pillar, where we talk about cloud entitlements and how you're going to handle those. We are giving away a raffle, so my shoes are not near as bright as some of my colleagues that have been walking around. But we are giving away a $200 no bull, because it's no bull, gift card to their store so that you can order shoes. If you want them to be as bright orange as some of my colleagues, you're welcome to. They're up on their website, though most of you would probably choose a more muted color. So you can scan that QR code and register for that. The QR code's also at our table downstairs. And then we're at booth number 20, which is on the very end by the food table, which is where I like to be, by the food table. And you can also check out our Trusted Protector cartoon series. And then our Alice and Bob podcast is a great podcast with industry experts. It talks about the human side of cybersecurity. And I promise it is not, the podcast is not a product pitch constantly through. I actually listen to the podcast on my runs. Otherwise, if it was sales and marketing stuff, I wouldn't. So it's a great podcast for the human side of cybersecurity. We interview some really interesting people. I encourage you to check that out. Thank you guys, and if you have any questions, I'd take those.